Hey everybody, it's Alex Meller at Cacneon here. Today I'd like to do a bit of an overview of vibe coding. Lots of people are talking about it. What is it? How do people feel about it? Why is it important or the dark important dangerous? I'd like to talk about backward looking, the evolution of labor markets that involve a lot of coding, software engineering, data. And I'd like to weave these first two topics, vibe coding and this labor market history, together to talk about, well, how is AI going to change these jobs going forward? And where does something that looks like vibe coding, like it or not, fit into that? Vibe coding is not well defined, but vaguely the idea is you're building an app or doing something similar involving coding real quick and dirty using a large language model type tool that can write code for you. This can include, hey, I'd like to build an app, and it's going to tell you the specific stuff to do. It could be you already know how to build an app and you're just getting code. And the idea is that in a real big hurry, you can cook up an app, kind of not knowing what you're doing, and have something. And this superficially is pretty exciting. So, to segue, how do people feel about these things? A lot of people you talk to, especially people that weren't building apps all day before, are just thrilled. They just can't shut up about how much fun they're having and how overjoyed they are. On social media, certainly, if you look at the kinds of people who have been building these sorts of apps professionally, people are horrified, angry. You can see a little bit of labor market fear in it. And then there are some legitimate criticisms about how these things are a little dangerous. You built this app just asking questions and cutting and pasting code. Along the way, maybe you didn't ask some of the right questions about how do I secure this endpoint? How do I scrub inputs and not get my SQL database injected into oblivion? And you build a bad, dangerous app that quickly shakes itself apart when you try to push it out into the wild. This is a great segue in turn to talk about, well, what are the exact boundaries of vibe coding and where are these concerns more or less relevant? There are really exciting new tools where you can give a prompt describing a whole website and see no code. That's something pretty hard to get right from a UI UX standpoint, but pretty cool. In that scenario, you're not even supposed to be looking at things like security. There's a whole universe of things if people have partial knowledge of what they're doing and just need a little help here, help there. I've done a decent amount of this myself. My journey, I know a lot about how computers work. I'm not really an expert anymore about where all the semicolons go, and I lean on AI for that sometimes. Finally, arriving at the labor market, to the extent that vibe coding is something that's going to be relevant in a corporate setting, probably the person doing the vibe coding is going to be a middle manager that used to build that kind of application and really knows what they're doing. And the vibe coding aspect is, yeah, I could write this code, but I don't have time, and it is pretty boring. It just needs to get cranked out. So here we can examine two pretty common observations about how AI affects doing work in general. You might have heard Mark Zuckerberg talking about, or a zillion and one other people. Well, AI doesn't do a whole lot to replace a senior developer for you. And it's exactly this story of you need somebody who knows what boxes need to get checked, who understands the whole system, who knows to ask the right questions. AI doesn't replace that, but AI is quite competent on taking on the role of a mid-level to junior developer in some people's estimation. If the point is to just write a function that does XYZ, and the XYZ is relatively straightforward, well, AI is great at that. Another observation you hear, and I think this is really, really underappreciated, we fixate on AI replicating elite performance, in part to measure the progress of AI. If you're interested in just ground level productivity, doing something useful, how does AI lift people up at the bottom of the distribution of a given skill? And you hear lots and lots of stories about, like, sort of new Python, but I didn't really get anything done. I wasn't confident. And now with a tool, just off to the races. So this fits well with a lot of conversation out there about vibe coding. It's people that weren't building apps before that are now having a great time doing all kinds of things, and in some cases having good experiences. Finally, let's look at the past, because I think lots of trends around AI are really parts of longer trends, and we just don't always recognize them as such. If you've got a job writing code, you're part of an industry that's been growing and growing and growing, at least up until pandemic, for many, many years. And in the background, the story is there's just lots of people that want to build an app beyond the labor market's ability to supply people who can build an app. It actually undermined a lot of the institutions that would train more people to do this kind of work, and that nobody wants a job as a computer science TA if they can make vastly more money at a software engineering job. And so you have to recognize there's just a lot more demand out there to build apps. If you hang in entrepreneurial circles, you meet somebody begging for somebody to build some basic app for them constantly. So vibe coding is coming in the sense that people are going to lean on AI tools to build things that economically they could not have built before. It might be an experienced manager of software engineering that really knows what they're doing and is really just saving time on having other people write code, and that's pretty safe. It might be people who have no idea what they're doing, and it's going to turn out to be unsafe. Everybody out there loves the fantasy that there's going to be, you're going to get to clean up after all these jerks and get paid lots of money to fix their vibe coding. And I wouldn't wait by the phone, because it's always been the story that there has been more demand for coding to build apps than there really has been supply. And vibe coding is blowing up as a term in part because there's an obvious key and lock fit there. So to summarize, vibe coding, I think, is here to stay, and it's important. There's a lot of vagueness about where exactly it starts and ends. Some corners are pretty problematic for making crappy apps. Some corners are pretty problematic because it's going to eliminate jobs. But then there's a lot of demand for apps, and that's just how it is. So I think this is actually a pretty important narrative, despite its kind of fluffy name and sort of arrogant, buzzwordy conversation about it. People are looking to make apps for cheap in a hurry, and that's a really big deal.